Do you want me to just pull up the study guide and I will do a half-hour lecture on the study guide? And that sounds a little boring to me, but does that sound okay to you guys? All right. Okay. I'm going to have to throw in a few jokes in there, talk about dirty diapers or something to keep myself entertained, but I will answer the questions. Okay. So let's just do this. I did not, I had my other one pulled up. Let me hurry and pull up the study guide really quick. Is anybody like really nervous? You guys are getting a little bit. Natalie is very nervous because she's actually she's about ready to take her oral exam here in half an hour. So that's all right. So come on camera if you guys can, if you want, if you feel like it. It's fun to see y'all. So let's just jump into it. So thinking like a historian. How do I think like a historian? What are the types of questions a historian will asks? For me, that's if you just tell me that, you know, historian basically just asks who, what, why, when, why, where, and how. You just look at it. You ask the connections, the story, the context. That's all you're trying to do. I'll be fine with that. I'm very, very easy, very liberal on that question, on those type of questions. So you guys, you know, just put a little thought and effort to it. How do you think like a historian? It's perspective. You're looking at major shifts, watersheds, things like that, and that'll be great. So what are the major themes of U.S. history? I don't care as long as you guys can, as long as you can, you know, you talk about it. Reconciliation, and things like that. It doesn't matter to me. So, and I don't think that, honestly, when I looked at the question bank, that wasn't even on there. So, XYZ affair, we'll get to that one. What are the major themes in U.S. history? Or no, we already did that. What is a historical shift? That's just where an event happens that takes history and just changes it to a whole new realm. And so when you look at U.S. history, some of the big historical shifts are Revolutionary War, the election of 1800, the election of 1824, the Andrew Jackson presidency, just some major shifts where you go from federalism to democracy, the Democratic Party, things like that. So that's a major historical shift, is just where history changes. What are the major events in U.S. history? I would hope that you would know the Revolutionary War, 1776, signing the Declaration of Independence. It's a pretty big one. Constitutional Convention, 1787. Some of those type of things. So, yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
For the major events in history, we don't have to memorize that whole list of 30, do we?
No. Nope. I just if that question pops up on your and I'm trying to remember if that question was in the question bank or not. Honestly, you guys know enough history now. You just throw in whatever you think, and you'll be fine. So it'll be good. You'll be fine. Let's jump into. Wait, where am I at? There I'm at. Okay. So what events led to the discovery of America? So just remember, the critical part is that you had the Crusades way back in the day, and they were exposed to the rest of the world. They started to get spices, and so you create this spice trade, and it's awesome, and things are going back and forth, and they're trading a bunch. And then you have the fall of Constantinople, and suddenly the trade route to the east is cut off. And so Portugal and Spain start to try and find alternative ways to get to India because they can't get through the Ottomans anymore. And that's why Columbus, that's why Cabral, that's why a lot of those explorers were out sailing the ocean, is to try and find an alternative way to to China, to the east. Yeah, Caitlin, I would definitely say that is true. A historical shift is the same thing as a watershed. Okay, so why were the Europeans looking for an alternative route to India and China? They wanted spices. They wanted to trade. They got used to having salt on their bacon. Can't have bacon without salt. Got to have bacon. So they wanted that, and so they were trying to find a new route there, a new route that way. Okay, who were the prominent explorers of the New World? Cortez, Cabral. He finds Brazil. He's from Portugal. Obviously, Columbus. Why did the Spanish clergy protest against treatment of the natives? So that's one of the things. Spanish clergy comes in. They actually have a little bit more religious background, and they don't like the way that they see the natives being treated, and so they treat them a little bit more happy, effective. So. Okay, colonizing America. How was America colonized? So this is an important one to remember, that it wasn't just the English government unilaterally colonizing America. There was a variety of ways. You could be a business. You could be a wealthy landowner. You could be religious refugees and just get a colony that way. So there was a variety of ways to colonize, right? Katie, I keep thinking I'm like telling a really funny joke. You're laughing. You must be watching something else. Like I'm talking about just boring stuff and Katie's just cracking up laughing. And Grant's doing something too. And I'm watching the chat box. I'm totally watching the chat box. And I cannot figure this out. It's all good. Never mind. I'll just keep going. You guys have a fun time. Yeah. Lucy's, yeah. History's really funny, Lucy. Ha ha. Okay, so you have a variety of ways of colonizing, and so that's why you don't just have one big colony. You have just one colony in the United States. You have multiple colonies, is because multiple groups, based on their needs, colonize. So in Pennsylvania, you have William Penn, wealthy landowner. He comes over and he colonizes. It's just kind of a reward for him being a cool dude. In Massachusetts, you have religious refugees. Down in Jamestown, Virginia, you have a business proposition, right? And so you have different. That's how it's colonized. That's how America's colonized. Waylon, I love your. Is that your little brother in the background? He's pretty awesome. Okay. So that goes hand in hand with what were the motives of the settlers. It depends on what they were doing. Up in the north, they were religiously based. Down in the south, there was a little bit more. They wanted money and they were trying to create a business. Okay, so it depends on why they were coming over, depending on their motives. Okay. Why were there 13 English colonies and not just one? Again, all of those questions tie together. There's 13 because there was a variety of reasons and a variety of groups that came over, and they each came from different areas of England and for different purposes, and that's why there's 13 different colonies and not just one. Yes, I am recording it, Matthew. All right, how did geography influence colonization? If you were to just tell me one good solid answer and just tell me in the South they could grow tobacco and that leads to slavery. And up in the North, you can't grow tobacco up there. You can't have these large plantations, and so slavery doesn't take hold up north the way it does in the South. That's one of the critical things of colonization. Also down in the South, you could grow the bigger cash crops, and so business enterprises came down in the South, whereas in the North, it was very amenable to family farms and things like that, but not large plantations of rice or sugarcane or tobacco or eventually cotton. Okay? So geography does play an influence on how it's settled. Okay, who are the major figures of the Great Awakening? If you could just remember Jonathan Edwards and Whitefield. George Whitefield. George Whitefield was the first rock star of America. The he who will not be named rock star of America was up and down the country, and he inspires them to turn to God, to have a religious awakening. All right. Yeah, Cotton Mather. I would accept Cotton Mather, except he's a slightly before the Great Awakening. Great Awakening. I'd accept it. I'd take it. Jonathan Edwards. Okay. Why was the French and Indian War fought? So remember that the French and Indian War, from our American perspective, was a pretty major war, but from the European perspective, it was a very minor battlefront on a larger European war. So there was a lot of fighting going on in Europe. George Washington actually starts the thing in America, but it quickly boils over in Europe, and that's where the primary fighting is going. If you've ever heard of a dude called Frederick the Great of Prussia, he's pretty active during this time period. So why was the French and Indian War fought? It was on the side to try and settle an ongoing dispute between France and England. And what were the results of it? The French lose, and they lose Canada, and Canada becomes English. That's the major result for us. And what sparks the French and Indian War? It's George Washington. He's out. He takes a bunch of British soldiers. Well, not British. They were like a militia, and they're out, and they come across some French troops, and they engage in a firefight and kind of start the war. So that's actually what starts it. What were the attitudes of the colonists at the end of the French and Indian War? So this is an important one. My dates are bad. Matthew, check this date for me. 1763. Isn't that the end of the French and Indian War? 1763, 55 to 63. Somebody do a quick Wikipedia search and make sure somebody hasn't plastered bad information on Wikipedia. 1755 to 63. So at the end of the French and Indian War, it's important to remember that everybody in America are still happily English citizens. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Actually, the internet says that it was 1754 through 1763, but that could be different because it's like, when did it spark? And then when did that fighting actually start? So
that's very diplomatic, Matthew. You could have just said, Mr. Jensen, you're wrong. You're wrong on this one. That would have been okay too. So according to Wikipedia, 54 to 63. It's all good. But the important part about this question is at the end of the French and Indian War, everybody's still happily and loyal citizens of the crown. They're very loyal. There's no intent to break away from England. The French and Indian War does not spark independence. So they're good. They're happy. Okay. All right. So what ideas and events led to the American Revolution? Really, if you just remember, the major one is just they wanted their rights as described by John Locke and the major political philosophers of the day. They just wanted their rights as Englishmen, white European males. Right? So when we talk about their rights, we're talking about those rights. Okay, so that's what they wanted. When they talk about no taxation without representation, they didn't like the fact that troops were being quartered in their homes. They didn't like the no trial without jury. All of those things they considered their rights. What was salutary neglect? So salutary neglect, remember, during the 1600s, the English Civil War is going on, and England kind of just ignores the American colonies. And so for about 100, 150 years, England does not really try and govern the American colonies. They just kind of let them alone. The business interests over in England are ecstatic about this because they're making money hand over fist from the colonies in America. And the colonists in America are extremely happy because they are probably the most free people on the planet ever as far as government not getting involved in your business. And so they were happy, and what that did is that creates a group of people that start to view themselves as a nation. Very, very infant in that idea, but that was salutary neglect, is that England sort of, they do ignore them. What was the Stamp Act? That was an act in 1765 where you had to pay certain taxes on any paper products. If you were going to go and print something, you had to pay a tax on that, and they considered that onerous because they were not represented in Parliament, and they were not. It was Parliament trying to directly tax the colonists. Oh, I just answered number 4. So why did that incite resistance? Because you had the Parliament directly getting involved. Whereas up to this point, they just left it up to the colonies to tax themselves. The Parliament gets involved and says, we're now going to directly tax you. And they said, you can't do that because we have no representation in Parliament. Why did new taxes on the, why did resistance to Parliament Center in Boston? So that's kind of an interesting one. It's an interesting one to think about. You can offer a bunch of really good reasons. My personal opinion, and I don't remember the reading if this is 100% according to the reading. So there's history is opinions sometimes. But my number one is Boston was filled with merchants, and so the taxes really hit the merchants hard, especially the sugar tax in 1763. But also, you are closest to England. And so if England wants to come over and make a demonstration, it's easier to send troops to Boston than it is all the way down to South Carolina, because they got to travel all the way down the rest of the coast. So it's close. The merchants are the most irate because they're upset with the taxes. And so, and then when England, and then it just blows up from there. Matthew, go ahead.
Why didn't Parliament just give the colonists representation?
Matthew, that's an awesome question. And I've read it, and I don't, it's kind of this, the attitude of the time was, you're the kids and we're the grown-up adults and we'll take care of you. It really was an attitude of, it started to get into an ego trip for a lot of the people in England. And remember, in England, they didn't have a very high quality of leadership at this time. They had good leaders, they weren't in leadership position. I think if Edmund Burke and William Pitt would have been in charge of the government in 1865, they would have solved the problem. And we would still be, we'd probably be independent by now, but we'd be like Canada. We'd have Queen Elizabeth on our quarters and stuff like that, because they would have solved it. Yeah, they did. William Pitt was quite the hero in America. All right. So what triggered the crisis at Lexington and Concord? The British were afraid that the colonists were arming themselves, and they knew that there was a arms storage out in Concord, and so the British troops marched to Concord to seize the powder and the guns and the weapons. And as they were walking through Lexington Green, the shot, nobody knows who started it. There was the militia had mounted up, and there was a shot, and they exchanged fire, and that was it. Once you've drawn blood, it's hard to back down. Matthew, go ahead.
Oh no, I still had my hand up. I forgot to put it down.
Oh no, my bad. Sorry. Okay. What were the results of Lexington Concord? That's what starts the Revolutionary War, and it also electrifies a lot of the people in the colonists to start the cause, to join the cause. England has now finally drawn blood, fired on American troops. So, why did Americans begin to call for independence instead of reconciliation? It's a slow process. It starts in 1765 all the way up until 1776. It's just slow but surely people start to realize we've injured the relationship enough that it's just time to stop it, right? Sometimes you just got to get rid of that boyfriend. There's just too much history. There's just too much history, and it's time for him to go, and you got to just start again. So England was a great boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever your choice is, for a long time. But there's just so much bad water under the bridge at that point. It's just time to go. Benjamin Franklin, he was very famous when he finally decided that it was time for independence. He said, basically, look, they have refused to treat us like fellow citizens of the empire to this point where it's just time to stop. So, yes, Natalie, I kind of actually agree. My daughter is 13 now, and I'm encouraging her to never get into a war of independence by not becoming dependent in the first place. All right, let me see, where are we at? Why is the Declaration of Independence important to America? So the obvious answer is that it declared our independence, right? The second one is that it clearly lays out the ideals that America is founded upon. And I think that they do it in such a way, like we talked about this, it's so awesome at its core that the American founding is rough around the edges. We still have slavery. We still, we don't let everybody vote. You got to be white. You got to own property and things like that. You got to be a man. But at the core of the Declaration of Independence is this idea that everyone regardless of who you are, is created equal. And so that has ramifications through the rest of the history. Yeah, as long as you're a white male, you're created equal. But then comes along the Civil War, and you've got somebody like Frederick Douglass that talks about the Declaration of Independence. He's a former slave, and he says, hey, if we're all created equal, if this is what this country's founded on, then we're all created equal. And that pulls us through the Civil War, and suddenly we have women's rights, and then we have civil rights, and to the point where now we look back on the founding and we look at the rough edges and we're like, yeah, that was a little crazy. But the Declaration of Independence still holds true. Okay? So kind of got a little chill as I was talking about that, like a good chill. Like I wanted to cry just a little bit. So, all right, I'll stop. Okay, why is it important to you? Winning the Revolutionary. So how did we win the Revolutionary War? We just survived. Honestly, if England would have thrown everything at us, we wouldn't have survived. But what Washington did is he just kept fighting enough and winning at the right times and the French came in on our side that we were able to survive to the point where England said it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. The business people in England said, we don't care if they're English or if they're Americans. We just want to trade with them. Will you stop this war? And so finally, Washington drug it out long enough. They won the Battle of Saratoga. The French came in on our side, and we, with one brilliant maneuver towards the end, we corner them at Yorktown. They surrender, and we win. That's my theory. So, okay. Who were the major figures on both sides of the Revolution? So George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. Over on the other side, King George, Cornwallis, Gates, generals. Just know a few of them, particularly on our side, right? Particularly on our side. What were the major battles of the Revolutionary War? So no Lexington and Concord. No, the Battle of New York, 1776. The battles, we actually entrenched ourselves in New York, and we got driven out by the English. They beat us consistently all through the summer and fall of 1776. We spanked them on Christmas Day at Trenton, though. Another critical one is 1777, the Battle of Saratoga. And that one's critical because that is the battle that convinced the French to come in on our side. That's the battle that convinced them to join us. And that was, they wouldn't have come in. They were just kind of sitting back there going, are they really broken up? Do I want to come in and make a move on this guy and or girl? Not and or, right? And when they decided to come in, they came in and they hooked up with us. It was awesome. All right, yeah, and it really was the French that turned the tide, because they do a lot of things outside of America that also helps. And then the final one is the Battle of Yorktown, 1781. That's where they surrendered. They give up. Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
So it worked because my list was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Long Island, New York, Battle of Trenton, Saratoga, and York. Does that work?
Yep, that'll be just fine. Just give me a few of them. Just show me that you at least know some of those. Yeah, the Battle of Cowpens is one of my favorite ones from the Revolutionary War, just because it's a cool name. All right, why did the Revolutionary War begin to make people think of America as one nation? Oh, I skipped the foreign alliances. Foreign alliances, the one critical part about the foreign alliances is that it convinced England that it was in their interest to just back off. It was in their interest economically, but now it was in their interest militarily. Because for us, they could have just strung us out for a while. But when France comes in, now that they don't want to have a repeat of what they've just experienced, 12, 13 years before in the big battle, in the 7 Years' War over in Europe. So that they're convinced to get out. Why did the Revolutionary War begin to make people think of America as one nation? When you fight together, baby, you are stuck together. It's just the way it is. When you start to bleed and die for one another, I don't care where you come from. I don't care how ugly you look. I don't care what kind of dog you own. You're on my side, and it brings you together. Ride together, die together. Exactly. So, what was the Newburgh Crisis? That's when the Army tried to convince George Washington to take power. bad idea, and George Washington puts a kibosh on that. So his officers try and convince him to take power, and he says, I'm not going to do it. Yep, they were going to ride up to Congress and take over and do their thing, okay? Okay, why was the Constitution necessary? Declaration of Independence is awesome, is ideals, but you needed a list. You needed some type of a structure. They had just dealt with the Articles of Confederation, and they're starting to fall apart, and they don't have a strong enough central government in order to tax, in order to create the security that they needed, and so they desired the Constitution. What was the Northwest Ordinance? So Northwest Ordinance was the law that was going to talk about how to bring in new states or new territories into the government. The important part is that they had learned their lesson with England, and they said, when we bring in new states like Kentucky, like Ohio, we are going to bring them in as full-fledged equal states of the Union. We're not going to put them as a colony. They're not on some substandard. They're in as equal states. And that was important. The other thing about the Northwest Ordinance is that it banned slavery, which is a happy thing. All right. What were the failures of the Articles of Confederation? Not enough strong central government, and not the ability to tax, and those type of things. It's just weak. Yeah, Caitlin. It was weaker. No taxing ability, no ability to run a government, centralized government. So you guys are all smiling again. Like I feel like you guys are playing like a game. Grant's really trying hard to look really casual. It's not me, Mr. Jensen. I'm just sitting here. Not me. I'm doing all right. Okay. What led to events? Okay, what's the difference between a nation and a confederation? So remember, a confederation is a group of equal states, whereas a nation is one state with provinces, with little states, with little provinces, those type of things. So one nation is a centralized government, whereas a confederation is a group of states. If it helps to think about it, the European Union is like a confederation. They're all equal states, and a lot of times they got to have absolute unanimity to go forward. So it's a little bit more unwieldy. It's a little bit more difficult. Okay. All right. Where am I at? I'm right here. What events led to the Constitutional Convention? If you remember, Shays' Rebellion convinced a lot of the movers and shakers at that time to remember that, look, we're already having, our society is already starting to fall apart. Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
I think you skipped the question, did the Americans see themselves as a nation or a confederation?
Oh yeah, a lot of them still saw themselves as a confederation, even after the national government was established. Uh-oh, Katie didn't agree with that one. Are you talking to me, Katie, or are you talking to somebody else? Oh, okay, so it's all right. Yeah, there's flies. So here's the thing. They saw themselves as part of a confederation, but also a nation. It's a slow process to go from a confederation to a full-up nation that they get after the Civil War. So when they put together the Constitution, one of the major pushbacks of a lot of people is, look, we still want states' rights. We still want the states to have all of this power. So there were some people like Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and John Adams that saw us as a nation. But there was certainly people like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Patrick Henry that saw us as still sort of a confederation. So they still refer to it as these United States instead of the United States. The would be singular, these is plural. Does that make sense? Did that help? Okay. So where was I at? Events led to the Constitutional Convention. Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion convinced the movers and shakers, Madison, Washington, that the fabric of society was not strong enough to not have a strong central government, and they needed to create something a little bit stronger so that they could put down and protect the domestic tranquility of these United States. Who were the important people at the Constitutional Convention? James Madison was the author. Who else was on the Gouverneur Morris? Gouverneur Morris was the one that actually wrote the preamble. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. I don't know. Who else was there? Billy Bob Thornton? I don't think so. So there was a few. It was fun. Okay. What were the important compromises reached by the Constitutional Convention? So the critical one, of course, is how the representation. Unfortunately, the 3/5 compromise wasn't as big of an issue then as it was later on. But the 3/5 compromise was how to count slaves, whether you count them as whole people or no people. Which is such a distasteful conversation to have, but the compromise they came up with is that they'll count as 3/5 of a person. Different society, different racist era, you know what I'm saying? I imagine people look back at us and think similar things with some of the things that we do today. The major compromise, though, was how the representation issue. So you have what they end up doing is that in the Senate, the representation is based on states and states only, whereas in the House, the representation is based on population. The Great Compromise. So those are two of the compromises that you can. What were the important? Did the founding fathers all share the same view of government powers, limitations, etc.? No, right? George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton thought the government should be much more powerful and strong and vigorous. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, the Jeffersonians felt like it should be a little bit more laid back, constricted, corralled, not as powerful. Okay. How did Washington's presidency shape the new nation? Really, Washington, all he had to do was be there. I mean, there was such competing factions between states' rights and a national government, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The fact that Washington, who was so well respected, stayed there for 8 years and just kept those parties together and kept those interests and those factions together and allowed a government to actually form and start running was if it hadn't been for Washington, I think we would have broken apart pretty quick. I can't imagine John Adams being the first president. Things would have gone rough, or Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton just going at it without a Washington to kind of keep them apart. Why was Washington elected president? Because he was just that awesome. He just had earned the respect of the entire country. They knew that they could trust him with the power of the presidency because he had shown that he was willing to give it up. How did Hamilton and Jefferson view the Constitution differently? We did a whole big thing on that, right? Implied powers versus actual powers that are written in the Constitution. Enumerated powers versus implied. Yep, that's good as well, Caitlin. Yep. Jefferson viewed America as an agrarian paradise, whereas Hamilton viewed it as a business enterprise, business opportunity, industrialization. That's answer number 4. How did they view the nation's future differently? That's how. Jefferson really viewed it as this agrarian paradise where they could ship in all of the manufactured goods from England, and Hamilton did not. What was Hamilton's economic system? Heavy emphasis, national bank, heavy emphasis on manufacturers, and a very, very solid financial system that could allow you to borrow money in order to spur the economy on, where Jefferson's economic system was farming, agrarian. How did Hamilton and Jefferson's divergent views lead to the formation of parties? So Hamilton's view leads to the Federalist Party, whereas Jefferson's views lead to the Democratic Party, or the Democratic Republican Party, as they like to call it at the time. How did the French Revolution affect the new American Republic? Many of them viewed that as a continuation of America's revolution, and it split right down the party line. The Federalists tended to favor England in its fight against the French Revolution and ultimately Napoleon, whereas Jefferson and the Democrats tended to favor the French. Why did Washington accept the Jay Treaty? He felt it was the best they could do. They were in no power to demand anything better. He just wasn't in a power. There was no ability to accept it. Very highly unpopular, though, the Jay Treaty was. Let's skip over, the Whiskey Rebellion, taxing farmers in western Pennsylvania. One of the only ways they could make money is to make whiskey. We've all been there. Sometimes the only way you can make money, no, never mind. I'm not going to go there. Sometimes poor people, they were poor and indigent, and that was the only way they could make money. And the government stepped in and said, okay, now we're going to start taxing you. Now we're going to start taxing the whiskey that you're making that's your cash crop. And it enraged them. So I'll leave it up to you to decide the major shifts and the watersheds, important ideas of the founding era and those type of things. All right, let's move on to the Revolution of 1800. Why was the election of 1800 called a revolution? Go ahead, Matthew.
I have another class in like 3 minutes, so this recording will be up on the recording page, right?
Yeah, if I can figure out how to do it. I'll figure out how to do it.
All right.
Who else needs to go? Or wait, I need to do a oral exam. How do you guys want to do this? Blackboard was being stinky. I don't mind just... Where's I don't even see Natalie. Where is Natalie? Oh, there she is, right up there. Natalie, how much time have you got? Do you mind if we just keep going for a little bit and then we'll do your oral exam, or do you need to go somewhere as well?
Absolutely. Just keep going.
Okay, sounds good.
Because the Mexican-American War and all that gets all jumbled, so let's keep going.
Yeah. Oh, Mexican-American War. All right, so let's just jump into it. Why was the election of 1800 called a revolution? Because it really, you go from 12 years of Federalist, Hamiltonian, Washington Adams perspective of how the future of America is going to be, to suddenly Jefferson comes in and it's democracy. It's I shouldn't say democracy. It's a democratic. It's the agrarian view. It's no centralized bank, no centralized industry. And so it's a complete shift in their outlook and their perception. And the beauty of it is that it was completely without bloodshed. There was a lot of harsh words, but it was without bloodshed. So it's just a complete shift in how America is going to view its future. What was the XYZ affair? So that was during the Adams presidency. John Jay, is it? I think it's John Jay. Or no, it's Marshall. Maybe it's Marshall. He's over in France, and he comes across the French speaking very indifferently and very, it's Marshall, yeah. Accusatorily and indifferent, and offering him, trying to get Marshall to give him bribes. And that the word gets back to America, and suddenly there's a complete shift in America's perceptions toward the French. Up until that point, there's a good portion of the population that support the French during the new French government during the French Revolution. And when the XYZ affair happens, it's a total change in America's attitudes towards the French, and a complete going back over to the British. Does that make sense? You guys are all like, sort of. It's the final nail in the coffin against the Frenchies during the French Revolution. We support the French Revolution up until, some of the Americans do, up until the XYZ affair. Once the XYZ affair happens, we're done. We wash our hands of the French. Even Jefferson and Madison, the Francophiles, they can't support the French. And so it's a victory for Adams and for Hamilton and for the ability to tell America, see, Britain really is our natural ally. And that's it. Does it keep us from going into the War of 1812? No. So what was the quasi-war with France? After this happens, during the Adams administration, we have shipping issues with the French. They're at war now, the French, and so they start boarding and taking and seizing our supplies, and so we start sort of pushing back. It's called a quasi, meaning sort of a war. There's nothing ever overt that happens in a big way, but it's a series of small issues with the French on how they're on, especially out in the ocean. So that's the quasi-war with France. Why did Adams sign the Alien and Sedition Acts? There was a big concern that there was a lot of spies in America, and so that was the number one, is that they wanted to make sure that there was nobody spying or causing insurrection in America. And the other thing is that Adams was just really thin-skinned, and he didn't like all of the newspapers criticizing him, and that was the distasteful part. I think you can argue that the first one was acceptable. The second one was just Adams abusing the power of the presidency to shut up people that were speaking ill of him. They weren't threatening him. They were just speaking ill of him. Okay. What were Madison's and Jefferson's main arguments against the Alien and Sedition Acts? Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of there's nobody is nobody's getting hurt here. We're just criticizing your policies, right? And so it's not freedom, and it shows an expansive government. It shows a very, very powerful central government, which is everything that we fought against during the Revolutionary War. So they definitely didn't like that. Who are the Federalists? That was the party of Washington and Hamilton. Make sure you understand that. I think we've gone over that enough. Who are the Republicans? That was the party of Jefferson and Madison, and we've gone over that a bunch as well. What was the significant about the transfer of power after the election of 1800? Again, that it was done peacefully. By this point, these two parties really hate each other. Adams and Jefferson's friendship is ruined. These two guys worked together to do this Declaration of Independence, and the election of 1800 ruins their friendship. Yes, Caitlin, the Republicans were Jefferson and Madison. So it was a really nasty election, and yet it was still a peaceful transfer of power. Peaceful transfer. Jefferson's presidency, did Jefferson deliver on his promised revolution? I mean, where are we today? That's my main argument. Where are we today? Are we a nation of agrarian, peaceful, happy, loving people that happily tend our sheep? Or are we based on big business, central bank, industrialization? For a little while, maybe, but eventually, no. Did we just lose Abby as well? Okay. What were the characteristics of Jeffersonian democracy? Jeffersonian democracy brought a few more voters into the pool. You didn't necessarily have to own big tracts of land to vote. Still had to be white, still had to be male. But it started to expand. Jeffersonian democracy was based off of that. Yeah. Anybody else put anything in their study guides that would be helpful? I'm trying to encapsulate Jeffersonian democracy. It was this. Honestly, I think Jefferson was kind of a pie in the sky. I like it. I like that, but he certainly had this sometimes unrealistic vision. Yeah, Caitlin, go ahead.
Well, I put down about the Jeffersonian democracy that there was a very defined separation from the state and the church, so he wouldn't do national days of fasting and prayer because that would give power to the government regarding religious stuff. And he also didn't want to have anything that represented a monarchy or king or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. No, central government was anathema to Jefferson. He just did not like it at all. Centralized government. So and he purposely did things to make sure that he downplayed the power of the presidency. So, all right, how did Jefferson attempt to dismantle Hamilton's system? He tried to get rid of the bank, but he really didn't. He couldn't get rid of it, but he did certain things to you know what? Let me hold on just a second. I want to make sure. Yeah, it's just kind of the things we talked about. Seems like there was more, but it's he tried to limit. Yeah, Caitlin, he did let the charter run out, but it actually doesn't run out until what is it? 18. When does it runs out in 1811, 1813? When does the first national bank run out? So it's actually during Madison's presidency that it runs out. But he certainly doesn't do anything to bolster it. Has anybody got that date? I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, if he said that, it was just a it was. I mean, honestly, the attitude towards the Bank of Madison pre-war of 1812 and Jefferson was the same. So it was. Yeah, let me see. Yeah, so it expires in 1811. So yeah, Jefferson and Madison allow it to run out. But that's Madison's presidency when it officially ends. But they're both cut from the same cloth. So, all right. Hold on. Let me get back to my questions. All right. So how did John Marshall and Supreme Court assert their power during the Jeffersonian administration? They just slowly but surely asserted the right of the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution. John Marshall was a Federalist. He was very much for business. He was very much for a strong central government, and he played his cards very wisely, and he tiptoed through the tulips very carefully, but he just slowly but surely exerted the power of the court to interpret the Constitution, and then they interpreted the Constitution in a Federalist way. So that's what he did, just through Supreme Court cases. What were the Barbary Wars? That was the group of Barbary states in North Africa that demanded payment from England, from France, from the United States to ship through the Mediterranean Sea. France, they paid up. England, they paid up because it was just worth it. George Washington paid up. John Adams paid up. Thomas Jefferson refused. He gets his navy and takes it over there, and they win a couple of battles, and they don't have to pay anymore. It's the first power influence outside of the hemisphere by the United States. What was the Louisiana Purchase? Purchase of the vast part of territory of the United States from Napoleon. It doubles the size of the United States. It was kind of hard for Jefferson to do that because it wasn't specifically mentioned in the Constitution that he could do that. And now we're going to lose Juliana. All right, let me see. Was the Louisiana Purchase constitutional? Depends on how you look at it. Hamilton said yes. Jefferson said no, but he still did it. Yeah, kind of, sort of is a great answer. Who were Lewis and Clark? Explorers. Jefferson sent on a trip to go and explore the new Louisiana Purchase. What threat did Aaron Burr pose to the new nation? He was trying to subvert and create another nation in order to set himself up as a power. He was, yeah, he just was a bad dude all around. All right, who were the Jeffersonians? They were specifically Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, and anybody else that concurred or agreed with Jefferson' view of how America should be. Yeah, he did. He killed Hamilton. What caused the War of 1812? Trade route issues, lingering problems from the Revolutionary War, not understand. Britain still had forts in Northwest United States and refused to leave. A bunch of issues like that. That one of the main issues was just lack of communication. It was just really hard to do any type of meaningful interaction between Great Britain and us because of the tyranny of the distance. So why did Andrew Jackson become a national hero? Two things. The Indian Wars, in 1812, 1813, he settled and drove a bunch of Indians out of the South, and then the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 were the two main reasons. He was already pretty popular before before the Battle of New Orleans, and the Battle of New Orleans put him over the top. Let me see, where are we at? Who were the War Hawks? That was a new breed of senators and representatives that came in that were very pro and aggressive in the military, usage of military. They were Democrats, but whereas Jefferson was more of a peace for everybody, they were very much aggressive as far as fighting the Indians, fighting the Mexicans, fighting anybody. Oh, did I skip some questions? No way, really? Oh yeah, I did. Sorry. Okay, let me go back and then I will. Okay, why was America ill prepared for the War of 1812? Because Jefferson did not believe in a large military, and so they weren't prepared at all. They had no large navy or anything to help them out in this process. And then they were just very disorganized as far as how do you actually conduct a war at the national level. What were the results of the War of 1812? A lot of people view the results as though nothing really changed. Everything was finally settled from the Revolutionary War. There was just no question about, okay, we really are an independent nation, and we're done. Britain pulled a few out of a few forts, but really there was no huge changes other than just this mindset of we're not going to do this again, and we don't ever go to war with England again. National hero. When the Constitution was ratified, the common belief was that slavery would slowly die out in America. Why didn't it die out in the South? The cotton gin. Cotton suddenly becomes a cash crop. They're able to grow cotton and get rid of those nasty seeds in the cotton in a way that allows them to earn lots of money doing it. Okay, so what did I get? Did I get everything? Is there any other questions that I missed? Did I get all of those? Okay, sounds good. Let me see. What were the essential elements of the Missouri Compromise? Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. Maine would be admitted as a free state to maintain the balance. And then they would draw a line along the bottom part of Missouri all the way across, and anything in the future that comes in on the south would be a slave state, and anything on the north would be a free state. Did the Missouri Compromise work? It kicked the can down the road. I mean, we still have the Civil War. I think in order for it to have worked, I mean, I don't know. Whenever I would say no. I'd say no. It pushed it down. The Missouri Compromise was a way to compromise between the North and the South and not cause there to be a war, not cause there to be contention. And it does for a little bit, but it doesn't fix it permanently. Does that make sense? Okay, what are the key points of the Monroe Doctrine? Stay out of our playground. We basically told the European nations, If you have any colonies over here right now, that's fine, but no more. And this is our sphere of influence from here on out. Stay out of South America, stay out. And England was actually fine with it because they didn't want any more colonies. And it was a good way for us to play against the French and some of their natural enemies over there in Europe. Because we weren't able to tell the British Navy where they could and couldn't go. They were too powerful at the time. Okay, does the Monroe Doctrine still apply today? Unfortunately, we still talk about it all the time. We still think that if something happens in Central America or South America, more so Central America, but kind of the whole hemisphere, we kind of view it as ours. So when the Soviet Union tries to put missiles in Cuba, we say, no go, you stay out of it, Monroe Doctrine. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later in the year, but yeah, it still does apply. My political science 101 class in college, we studied and read and talked about the Monroe Doctrine. How did the Federalist Party die? They stopped appealing to the masses. If you have a party that's based on aristocratic rule, you're not going to get a lot of masses. Were there ideas? Yeah, their ideas are actually resurrected when the Whig Party comes around. But when you have a party that sits there and says we're aristocratic and we're going to create this group of elite people that are going to rule everybody else, very quickly that just turns off most of America. And so they just die out because of that. Most of their policies, again, are resurrected with the Whig Party. So how were presidents elected under the caucus system? Remember, that was just basically Congress, because there were so many Democrats at that point. The whole country was practically a Democrat at that point, that the Democrats in Congress just got together and decided who the nominee would be, and then that they were elected president. What was the corrupt bargain? So remember, in 1824, you have a four-way split, 4 people running for Congress. Henry Clay is one of them. He's also the Speaker of the House, very powerful in the Congress. Henry Clay comes in 4th, so he's eliminated because you only take the top 3. Andrew Jackson had the most electoral votes, had the most popular votes, but when they go to Congress, John Quincy Adams talks to Henry Clay for about 2 or 3 hours, and afterwards Henry Clay throws all of his support behind John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams is elected. And then John Quincy Adams turns around and makes Henry Clay Secretary of State. Now, up to this point, everybody that had been president, except for John Adams, before had been the Secretary of State to the previous president. And so it looked like John Quincy Adams was kind of saying, this is my heir apparent. And Andrew Jackson was having none of it. He said, that's a corrupt bargain. They made an agreement behind closed doors, and that's nasty. You shouldn't do that. That's the essence of the corrupt bargain. So they make that claim for the next 4 years. Why did the Republican Party split? Primarily because you have the War of 1812, and you have a group that says, you know what, we're not Federalists, but this idea of a national bank to be able to protect us during wars, be able to give us investments during times of manufacture, all of those ideas from the Federalist Party, they kind of creeped them back in, and the Democrat Party splits between the National Democratic Party, and then they call them the Democratic Republicans. And eventually, the hatred towards Andrew Jackson further splits to the point where most of the National Democrats become Whigs. So it's just a natural split as people go back to original concepts. So what was national republicanism and what was the American system? Think of that just a new version of federalism. Just a new version of federalism without the aristocracy, without the aristocratic feel. It was still very democratic as far as we're bringing the common man in, common white man. We're bringing all the commoners in to vote, but we're not We're going to be for a national bank. We're going to be for industry. The national, the American system is a way to improve America as a whole. And you need a strong central government. You need lots of canals and roads and railroads and all of the infrastructure to create one big, great nation. Yeah, why did the Republican Party split? Why did it? No, what? That's a typo. Thank you for catching that. That should be the Democratic Party. Good catch, Katie. I'm gonna go change that right now. Hold on. Hopefully it will let me edit that. All right. Is that when you guys did your study guide questions, was that the Republican Party as well? Okay, it's fixed on the study guide questions now. Not that it helps you guys like a month ago when you were like, "Oh, well, this makes no sense." So I'm sorry. All right, let's go to Jackson's presidency. What was Jacksonian democracy? So this is you got to think of a bunch of rednecks suddenly getting a lot of power. That's the way that a lot of people viewed it. Jackson was just a stinking no good redneck, and there's no way on earth that he should get. I mean, that's like giving Uncle Bubba the keys to the car. It just, a lot of people viewed Jacksonian democracy as a bunch of rednecks. Jackson viewed it as the power of the people, the power of the commoners, the power of the little people, the people that have been pushed down for their whole lives by the aristocratic, wealthy, the rich, the elite. And it was a rise up for that. Jackson's election in 1820 different than any from the previous presidential elections because the King Caucus system was out, and it was an actual national election, and there was more people that participated than any other election in U.S. history up to that point, as long as you were white and male. That joke's getting old. Is that joke getting old for you guys? It's a little old for me now. It's getting a little stale. All right. How did the nation become more democratic under Jackson? More people were involved in the process. The little guy, the commoners, suddenly said, I can be part of this as well. Sometimes that was good. Sometimes there was some pretty shady characters that got involved. Who were Calhoun, Clay, and Webster? Those were the three great senators, representatives during this time period that fought against or fought for Jackson. Senator Calhoun was from South Carolina, Senator Clay was from Kentucky, and Senator Webster was from Massachusetts. They're just the three of the great power centers of that. How did Calhoun view slavery and the Declaration of Independence? He thought the Declaration of Independence was a lot of hooey. He just didn't buy it, because he thought slavery was instituted by God. Why would God created them less than us, and so this idea that all men are created equal is not true. What is nullification? That is the idea that states, if they choose, can nullify and not be held to federal law. Senator Calhoun was very much one of the driving forces behind that. Is nullification constitutional? Well, we had a civil war that said it wasn't, but there's still people today that say that it is, that it's a valid constitutional process. So you make up your own mind. How did Jackson respond to South Carolina's nullification convention? He said, no way. There's no way this is going to happen. He called up troops. He sent troops down there. He put the Navy on alert. He did all sorts. He really told them in South Carolina, there's no way this is going to happen. And South Carolina backed down. How are South Carolina's nullification threat and the Virginia and Kentucky resolves from 1798 different? So if you remember, the Kentucky and Virginia resolves was written by Jefferson and Madison respectively. You guys should have read I forget which one it was, but basically said that federal law does not apply in certain instances to states. So how was it different? South Carolina's nullification threat carried, whereas, my opinion, Virginia and Kentucky, that was a theoretical position that was taken by Jefferson and Madison. It was still, it was a war of words. Whereas the nullification threat from South Carolina, we start to get hints of the Civil War. It's a lot more serious, and it's a lot more not secession quite yet, but you start to get the feel that this is much more serious. This is not just Jefferson, the lover of freedom and peace, writing about theoretical ideas. This is a state that's starting to say this isn't going to happen, and we're going to leave the Union if it does. Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay. Don't you love how I don't even wait for you to say yes? I just assume you're going to say yes. Bad teaching moment. Sorry about that. Okay. So what was the Bank War? The Bank War is the battle between Henry Clay and Biddle, the president of the bank, and Andrew Jackson over whether they're going to extend and renew the bank charter. So the bank charter gets renewed in 1816, and it's going to expire in 1836. And so Henry Clay and Biddle try to force the issue in 1832 to make it a election issue. All right, see, Oliver. And that's the Bank Wars, is the back and forth between them. Why were the Indians removed rather than assimilated? In a few instances, they were assimilated, but in most instances, Jackson just viewed them as a problem, as less than, that they weren't compatible with white settlements. And so he said, we just got to get rid of them. We're going to put them west of the Mississippi. How did the Americans' view of Indians affect their response to Indian removal? Again, if you had a little bit more enlightened view of the Indians, you were horrified by it. If you were more like Jackson, who viewed them as, less than the European whites, then you were okay with that. Especially if you wanted the land that they were on, down in Mississippi and Alabama and Florida. If you wanted that land, you were very much for getting rid of the Indians. Was Indian removal harmonious with the principles of Declaration of Independence? I certainly hope not. It's one of the black stains on our country's history. It just is. I love my country. I love the history. I think there's so many great things about it. That just was not one of the good parts. I've had a few moments in my personal history like that. Not that bad, but, where you just look back and you shake your head and say, no. Okay, is a national bank a good idea? That's very much a your opinion kind of a question. You can see what happens when they get rid of the national bank. We immediately go into the, the 1837 crash. So there's ways that you could argue it both ways. Is the national bank constitutional? Again, that goes back to the Hamilton Jeffersonian debates. Is it implied or is it enumerated? What is the specie circular? So that was the idea that if you were buying land in the West, you had to use actual real money, meaning gold. You had to use gold to buy that land. And as soon as the government said that, a lot of other people said, well, if they're only accepting gold, they must not be very confident in this paper money, and it starts to cause this lead up to the crash. How did John Quincy Adams fight against slavery as a member of Congress? They called him Old Man Eloquent. It was really, if you were to study John Quincy Adams' life, his greatest time was that time when he was in the House of Representatives, and he was relentless. He was relentless in his defense of abolitionists and his attacks on the institution of slavery. Let me see, where are we at? Okay, we're getting close. We're almost there. Why did Jackson mistrust the Second Bank of the United States? So that just goes into more depth. That whole section on the Bank Wars. So short answer, you'll be fine. If you need a longer answer, do a little bit more research on that. Jackson wins the bank war because he's just relentless and he stands on his principles. As much as I don't like the man, Jackson was pretty spectacular in that whole back exchange. Okay, so what causes the Mexican-American War is just plain we wanted land. We believed in this manifest destiny. That's number 6. So we'll talk about number 6 really quick as well. Manifest destiny is just this belief that this country is designed and was intended by God, by divine providence, to be from sea to shining sea. And in order to do that, you need all the land in between. And so the land was disputed along the Mexican-American border, and we purposely put troops and forts and stations down in that area. And then when the Mexicans tried to get rid of us, and there was a skirmish, President Polk said, "See, they started it. We're going to finish it." And so he invades Mexico and wins the war, and we take the second largest land grab in our history after the Louisiana Purchase. Big chunks of Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, we take from Mexico. Nicholas Biddle was he was the president of the bank, Caitlin. So him and Senator Clay are on one side fighting against Andrew Jackson during the bank war. So what caused the Panic of 1837? The removal of the national bank. You don't have anybody to control to a certain extent the money and the paper money, and so a tremendous amount of state banks pop up, a bunch of local banks, and they start printing paper money. And it leads to inflation, which leads to a run on the bank to try and get gold. And then gold runs out, and suddenly you have a lot of paper money that's worthless, and that you end up with a panic, and not so good stuff ensues. That's a very, very short version. Hopefully that makes sense. How did the United States gain Texas and Oregon? So remember, Texas comes to the United States because they won and fought their own revolution, and they became an independent nation. Texas is the only state that has joined the United States as an independent nation. And if you ever lived in Texas, they will remind you of that multiple times. Yeah, okay. Natalie knows all about that. And then Oregon, it was just compromise and negotiations between us and Great Britain. There were for a time they wanted to fight over it, but Polk said there's no need to fight. We'll get what we want, and that's how we get Oregon. Why did Americans begin moving west? Just land. Remember, the primary way to earn money back in the agrarian times was to have land and farm it and sell your crops. We don't have the Industrial Revolution had not happened at this point. So land, you just keep wanting more and more and more land. Part of the manifest destiny. Who were the Whigs? So remember, the Whigs were largely the group that were the National Democrats that got so tired of Andrew Jackson that they formed and created their own political party to start fighting against Jackson and his party. They tended to be, they brought all of the old principles of the Federalist Party, or many of them, minus the aristocratic film. Yeah, I lived in Texas for a little while. It's fun. Why did some Americans oppose the Mexican-American War? Like Abraham Lincoln, if you were a Whig, you tended to be against it because Polk was a Democrat. But also it just felt a little shady. I mean, they didn't really start anything. It was just a minor border skirmish, and then we invaded. So it was pretty nasty that way. Oh yeah, manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was just the belief at that time that America was designed to be from sea to shining sea. So we were, and so that's why we felt that the Mexican-American War, that's why we felt that territory was us. It was ours. It's in North America, so it's obviously it's ours. There were some people that thought we should have just taken all of Mexico. So, hey, can you guys give me like 1 second? My wife has called me twice in a row. That's a signal. So give me just a second. So when I gave her that secret code to call me just twice in a row, I was thinking like the kids broke their arm or something like that. She just thinks I just want to talk to you about whatever. So it's all good. All right. Okay. So where were we at? Manifest Destiny. Why did some Americans oppose? What were the results of the Mexican-American War? We just got a lot of land. Very, very, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, huge chunks of Colorado, Nevada. We got a bunch of land. And that is the antebellum era. I think that's it. What were some of the important ideas, important people? We covered those just barely in class. I love to see your guys' opinions. We go from, you think about it from an agrarian Jeffersonian perspective to by the end, we are just militarily, we're taking land from Mexico and we're doing our thing. So, yeah. Any questions? You were the 3 survivors. We started out with like 14. All right. Hey, Caitlin, if you, or no, wait, never mind. Sorry. My bad. I will, I've got to download it and then I'll put the link in. I'll just go put it in on the announcements, or I'll just send it out to everybody in an email. But I've got to take care of Natalie here really quick, give her her oral exam, and then I'll go post that. Yeah, I don't know. I was getting bored about 2/3 of the way through it, like really bored. And that's always a bad sign. When I'm getting bored, I just can't imagine what you guys are going through. So. All right, thanks. Natalie, you ready?
And my keyboard will work, then yes.
It's always helpful. All right, I am setting my timer so that I don't go too, because there's nobody else coming in afterwards to stop me. So we'll just start going. All right. So here's how we'll do it. I'm just going to go through study guide questions. I'll just ask you some questions, just to ask you to tell me a little bit about it. This first section, just give me just short answers, just kind of what you think, and then on your choice, we'll take one of those essay questions and we will go kind of a little deeper into it. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Good luck, baby.
Oops, I just closed something. Let me just open something up really quick. I started closing down tabs, and I, of course, closed down the one that I needed to keep open. So. Okay, so tell me a little bit about the effects of a little bit about the French and Indian War. What were the results of that?
I don't even remember. I just drew a blank.
Do you remember when it happened?
Before America decided that we wanted to kind of start splitting off from them, because I remember that after the French and Indian War had happened, we weren't exactly ready. There weren't ideas of splitting off from Britain yet. That started taking place later after, with more events leading up to that. So I remember it happened around then, before that.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about, tell me a little bit about the compromises in the U.S. during the Constitutional Convention.
So some of the compromises were when, I believe it was George Washington and who else was it? I don't want to say, and Hamilton, I think it was Hamilton, were disagreeing with some of the other parties like Jefferson about ways that the government could be run, whether it wanted to be more agricultural or industrial. And then also looking at slavery, if they should be considered as whole people, as not any people at all, which led to the 3/5, I believe it was, Act. And then you had the Great Compromise, I think is what it was, where they compromised hugely on an event.
Very good. Your last two were spot on. Your first one, that argument came a little bit later. That was not really, well, no, I'd give that to you. Jefferson wasn't at the Constitutional Convention, but Hamilton was, and he certainly was talking about, the need for a strong executive, a strong federal government. And so, yeah, I just convinced myself that you're fine. Very good. All right. Tell me a little bit about Hamilton's view of and vision of America.
So Hamilton definitely wanted America to go in a bigger sort of way, in more of an industrial side, with a big American bank, and just a lot heavier than what Jefferson wanted to do. Jefferson wanted to keep it more state-wise, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What is no, never mind. I won't go there. Why was the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Or can you tell me what the Bill of Rights is?
I've gone blank again, just like the French Revolution. I had it and then it was gone.
The Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution, so it has something to do with the Constitution.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't for the life of me remember
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's like the time I called my wife my old girlfriend's name. Sometimes you just forget. Sometimes you just forget. So, but I remembered from that point on. So if you remember, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and that was one of the criticisms of the Constitution, was that it didn't guarantee the rights of the people. And so like Jefferson and Patrick Henry and some of those guys said, we're not going to support this unless you add a Bill of Rights. It says the people have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, those type of things. And so that was kind of a compromise that they made, is that they drew up the Bill of Rights and they added it to as the first 10 amendments. Let me see. What do you think was one of the for you personally, what was one of the most important historical shifts, watershed moments in what we've studied so far? Just your opinion.
I think it was the Revolutionary War when we broke off from Britain, just because it showed not only us, but other people around the world that you can stand up. And if you stand up and you speak on what you believe in and you don't back down from that, that you can truly make a difference and people will listen.